So I'm here today with Scott Wollschleger. Scott, thank you so much for having us over.
Yeah, thank you.
So the question we always like to start out with is, how do you take your popcorn?
I like salt and butter. It's pretty
A
basic.
classic combination. Part of the idea of kettle corn new music is sharing music in a bit more of an informal environment than some concerts. So one of the questions I'm always curious to talk about with composers is, what is an experience you've had with music outside of a sort of formal context that's been particularly meaningful to you?
Most meaningful musical experiences don't happen for me in concert halls. It would happen when I'm in the car or when I'm passing by a radio on the street or hearing a moment. My concept of music enjoyment is based in fragments. Like I hear a little blip here and there. The continuity of the concert experience doesn't lend itself to pleasure for me unless I'm in the mood for it or it's like an amazing piece. You know, what you're going to remember about a piece is a fragment. You're not going to remember 40 minutes of time. You'll remember certain moments sticking out.
So in your day-to-day life, when you do choose to listen to music, when does that happen? Or how does it happen?
I rarely listen to music for like a pleasure. If something's emotionally resonating with me, I'll keep playing it over and over again until I get sick of it. And so I will just put a certain track on for repeat and do a little stretch to it and or I play piano and I play Bach almost every day as a sort of eat your Wheaties.
You were mentioning before that you often don't write pieces in order.
Right.
Maybe you could speak about that for a second because that's perhaps related.
I go backwards when I write. So I start and then I say, well, what was before that? Like, how did we get there? And I think it ends up being that where I think a piece starts, I end up kind of moving out in two directions from the starting point. But I also was saying earlier that even though I start what ends up being the middle, at the end of the piece is when I actually will do the most arranging of where the sections go, because then it gives it new life for me, and I juxtapose things that necessarily didn't seem to have relationships, and then to see if something maybe more powerful emerges when I move it out of order. And I think actually not having a sacred plan for when things happen, I think gives the piece more energy. I think there's an organic consistency in what I'm doing anyhow, that it seems like, this is coming out of one person's mind, even though for me when I'm doing it, it is rummaging through hundreds of little pieces of information. But yeah, I'm not a continuity person.
So a lot of your pieces have the word Bronto in their title. Could you tell me what this word means and why you're so interested in it?
I was thinking, wasn't it Jackson Pollock who was afraid to be on camera because it would take his soul? Wasn't that a fear he had? I'm afraid if I tell you what Bronto means, that this is going to zap it into the cameras forever. Bronto, it's an imaginary concept. I think originally it had to do with dinosaurs, particularly Brontosaurus. And originally it was about the Bronto or the Brontosaurus nature of anything. And then it sort of morphed into a perspective that looks at the odd proportions or something that was unusual or obnoxious or ridiculous. And I think for me more recently, the nature of Bronto has taken on an urban quality. And I think cities have a sort of ridiculous quality to them. Just the juxtaposition of rich and poor and clean and shit and speeds and people running, people dying on the street. And there's something to me about urbanity itself, which is quite Bronto. So I think Bronto now is an attitude. Yeah.
And when music is Bronto, what is really exciting about that for you?
I think specifically in my music, if something's Bronto, it has the construction of the material is usually based on a high or low note going to a high note, as the kind of what I call the motion of sound. And so when I do Brontals, or when that shows up, it's usually reflecting the material I'm using, which I think has a simplicity that I think relates then back to the dinosaur notion. It's like the song of the Brontosaurus, but of course it's abstracted.
So the piece that we have on our concert, Bronto Symmetry, can you talk about that piece?
That piece also has the same construction of a low note going to a high note. And that piece actually is, to me, it's a repetition of the same thing at different scales. That it's as if you're listening to something and then you zoom in and it's fast and you zoom back out and then you really zoom out and you zoom back in. And so I think that piece is about the same thing happening over and over again, but the listening is either getting close or zooming out to what's going on. And Bronto symmetry for me, as a concept, was the piece actually has quite a bit of pattern in the metric patterns that are happening throughout the piece, and there's symmetry within these sections, but as taken as a whole, the symmetry is sort of lost. And I think what I like the most about Bronto symmetry, and it's actually the direction I'll probably keep working with, is that it's very episodic in the different sections, and I almost equated it to like a comic book or something, where each section is like a frame.
Well, we're really looking forward to it.
Cool.
And thank you so much for having us here.
Thank you.